Hello and welcome to HighTide Theatre's Inventing the Future digital conference. My name is GREECHAN. I am the digital producer at HighTide. Today I am wearing a pink shirt, the white t-shirt underneath. I am a white male and I have short brown hair, and I'm also wearing a black lanyard and white earphones as well. Today I will be chairing this fantastic conversation with some industry and outside of the sector experts, so you can see on your screen now, around the theme of digital innovation. Digital innovation is really important to us at HighTide. We have spent the last 18 months or so in the pandemic responding to the world of digital, and wanted to convene this conversation today to open up conversation and provocations from writers working in digital, other in the sector professionals, and open it up to an outside of the sector conversation. So today we'll be doing just that. I'm going to pass over to CARIDAD to begin with for an audio description, and then we will continue our conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. Hi, I'm CARIDAD SVICH. I'm a theater maker, mostly a playwright, but I do other things. I am a white female, fair skin, brown hair. I'm wearing blue eyeglasses, blue rimmed eyeglasses, and a flowered shirt and red earphones. And I am beaming in from New York City.
Thank you, CARIDAD. And next up we have Leigh.
Hi, I'm Eve. I am a white woman with bleach blonde hair. Right now I'm wearing a dark t-shirt, black headphones, and pink sunglasses, which I'm wearing because I have a migraine right now.
Thank you to Eve. And next up we have Jack Lowe.
Hello everyone, my name's Jack. I'm a white male wearing tortoiseshell glasses, a black Rain Mac, and I am sat on a stage set in our making space in Norwich.
Thank you, Jack. And of course, last but not least, over to Tim.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Robinson. I'm a white male. I have sort of light brown hair. I'm wearing a white shirt and very attractive black headphones. And I am sitting in Cambridge in the Bradfield Centre, which is a co-work space on Cambridge Science Park.
Thank you, Tim. It is notable to mention at this point that I am substituting for Annette Mees, who couldn't be here to chair the panel today, unfortunately due to an illness, and we wish Annette all the best, and hopefully we will see her soon. But in her absence, you do have myself chairing the panel conversation today. So digital innovation is something which we have, and a term we have discussed a lot over the course of the pandemic, and in the theatre sector have really had to consider our approach to digital as we've been outside our conventional spaces and places over the last 18 months. But we wanted to examine how we approach digital, what we have learnt, what has worked well and what hasn't worked well. And I feel like a good place to open this conversation and hear more from our participants in their practice and begin to answer these questions is back with CARIDAD. So CARIDAD, if you wouldn't mind giving us an introduction to your work, your practice, and your exploration of digital, because I know that you have some really interesting insights to offer from all the way from New York for us today.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Yes, like I said earlier, I'm primarily a playwright, but I also dip my toes into other aspects of the arts. At the top of lockdown, I had 8 shows cancel, postpone, etc., all of which had been about 5 years in the making. So I suddenly felt like I was in one of those strange game shows where your life is flashing before you, and you're going, where did all that time go? What have I invested in? But I also have been, for a long time, I guess since the early aughts, I've been making work that explores various levels of mediation, usually hybrid work to some degree, and have been pounding the drum about digital theater to a lot of people's consternation. And so suddenly I just found myself kind of like, oh, wait, there's this other realm that we can be in, and one that I felt really at home in, weirdly, as a writer. So I didn't consciously decide I'm going to pivot, to use that expression, but I felt like it was an opportunity, weirdly. My health was with me, and the people around me were healthy, so I felt like, well, maybe in this time of exploration, I can go back to some ideas that I've been thinking about earlier, a long time ago, and probably building on ideas that I've been doing around global theater actions that I've led through an unofficial organization that I run called No Passport, which is devoted to human and environmental rights, and also advocacy and publication of new work in theater and in performance. So I started to make some work that could, in my head, could sort of be modeled into any platform. This is sort of a very strange remit for a writer. So like usually you think of a space that the piece is going to be in and kind of make something. And this time I was just like, what would happen if I built something that could take place audio or in a hybrid platform or physical or and something that could be collaborated in a digitally native way. And so that led to a series of explorations, which led to 2 world premieres, an area premiere of work, ongoing collaborations. I'll speak to one of these just for a quick second, which is a piece that I built called Theater, A Love Story, with a company in Cincinnati, of all places, called NOWE, KNOW Theater. It's a piece that was conceived as a installation piece for theater with text and video and dance. And it was planned before the pandemic. We were going to premiere in February of 2021. And I thought, well, lockdown happened, it's all going to be over. And then, to my surprise, this small company with a very small operating budget said, we're moving forward with our season, and we're just going to reconceive it all. And you're going to be our guinea pig in the sense that your production will combine live, in-person, at least for the actors, but not for audience, live in-person work with film and dance and projection and video and everything on top of it. And so that project creatively sustained me, especially for the first part of the pandemic. We've just started working in pre-production on it. The artistic director of that company is a lighting, scenic, and videographer designer. And so we just started exploring what could be possible. And, 2 of the things that came through in that collaboration before I hand it over to my colleagues on this panel is thinking about one of the beautiful things about making work in digital space, and I know that there are writers out there who may be listening, is that you're considering possibly, in terms of your relationship to audience, maybe spaces that they may not have access to. So I know that the word of accessibility comes up a lot. I will say that one of the exciting things about this particular project, Theater, A Love Story, was that there was a decision made early on that we would film in spaces where audiences usually are not allowed or not welcome, or simply spaces that are like abandoned and therefore logistically are not able to go there, and start allowing an audience into virtual environments and physical environments in their neighborhood that they didn't even know about. So I'll start there before I pass it on.
Amazing, CARIDAD. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that insight. And I suppose, just as we speak about writers and writers interaction with digital, Eve, I feel like it's a great place to start with you to gain your insight into your work in digital as well.
Thank you. Yeah, CARIDAD, that was so rich and exciting. It's funny, that you sort of ended with this point about access, because I feel like that is one area in which I'm kind of often asked to work. I feel like theater discourse loves a really tiresome binary, and one of them is that digital work is more accessible than work that kind of exists only in one room. And that's not necessarily true. We all have different access needs, like everybody. Our access needs will change depending on our health, our caring responsibilities, our financial situation. There are many variables that affect access. But something that I had been exploring before the pandemic, like I'm just very interested in the internet anyway. And something that I'd been exploring actually sort of just before the pandemic, although of course that wasn't how we were thinking about it, is the access needs of people who have fluctuating health conditions. So I did a play called Midnight Movie, which was on at the Royal Court, and a number of the key creatives have conditions that mean that their access needs change quite a lot. And something that we were thinking about is how weird it was that we were kind of writing about the experience of living with such a condition, but that many people who had that condition might not be able to make it to the theater. And we didn't want to live stream a performance, which in retrospect I sort of regret, but anyway, that was how we felt at the time. Instead, what we did is we made like a whole other thing that people could subscribe to for free. I called it a digital body of a show, partly because that was a metaphor that was used in the text of Midnight Movie, that when your physical body is vulnerable, your digital body can somehow feel more penetrating or even sometimes more alive. Yeah, that in some way I wanted the show to have a digital presence that had to do with its, it felt philosophically important not to just live stream it, that in some way the digital body is different from the physical body. Not, of course, that like a live streaming is different from being in the room with a piece of theater, but yeah, so the creative team got together and basically did, you could sign up for free and sort of had like pieces of story and essays and images around the question of how disabled people interact with the internet would just appear in your inbox at kind of odd times of the night. And during the pandemic, we decided we wanted to make another of those. Like, actually, we felt that it was quite essential that we do that. And so we did. It was called Invisible Summer, and there were kind of 2 airings of it before and after Christmas 2020. And I think the thing, like, I've been asked many times about, and I guess, I mean, I'm sure we all have, what makes something theater, what makes something digital theater, what versus, I don't know, some other art form. And I don't necessarily feel like I can speak authoritatively on that. But one of the things that felt theatrical to me about that project, and continues to be really enjoyable to me, is that it was specifically time-based. Like we sent all of the emails at set times, and we thought quite a lot about the pacing of the emails in terms of like the construction of an audience experience. But actually, once we sent it, there's of course no control over whether or if somebody is going to read it, and they can unsubscribe at any time. Which is something that I struggle with. I feel like if you're really having the chronic illness experience, you can't unsubscribe, but that is technically against the law. So we had to include an unsubscription button. So I think that's one of the things that for me, I don't know, on a gut level, kind of makes something a piece of theater, is that there is in some way like a time-based offer to the audience. and that you're thinking about, I don't know, like shaping the audience's experience of a finite and limited time. So that's me, I think, for now.
Amazing, Eve. Thank you for that. It's certainly a really interesting point, and I'm sure something we'll circle back to later. Of course, during the course of this conversation, we will talk about how the pandemic has shaped that and how we respond to digital post-pandemic. But someone who I know who has been exploring science and technology with his organisation pre-pandemic and has continued to do that is Jack. So hi, Jack. I think now would be a great time for yourself to come into a conversation.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks everyone. Yeah, I mean, we are we're a devising theatre company. All our projects are what we call polyauthored. So yeah, we all get together and we don't have a writer. So hello writers, but we don't generally work with writers at all. And I guess the reason why that works for us is because we're monographic in what we explore, in the sense that we always start with an area of science. And as you say, Aaron, recently we have specifically made our last three projects have engaged with science, but also super interesting explorations into tech. Very briefly, we made a project in Australia and the UK, working with the very early in this generation of use of VR, using, well, it's 360 filming, but shorthand VR. And that was obviously a really interesting project, because all of these projects that we've made are location based. So digital, but using digital in what we would call a theatre. And I guess that's how I'm very different to maybe the digital projects that have been happening during the lockdown. I don't know how, I mean, I do know how people have done it, but my big thing is bringing digital tech, and specifically the sorts of digital tech that are not just kind of in, rich white kids gaming rooms, but like tech that you can get off the shelf, and trying to kind of essentially form a way of using that tech and trying to innovate how storytelling works in location-based theatre. So Frogman did that, and that was working with coral reef scientists. Gastronomic worked with iOS-based AR, which is like, for those who don't know, it's basically Apple-based AR creation as opposed to Android-based augmented reality stuff. And then the last show we made, Deciphering, we sort of loop back on a bit of tech that we'd tried before, using essentially scanning of a space for video mapping, using a new bit of relatively new bit of kit called Lightform, which essentially scans a space and then you can video map and do interesting things. But I guess the thing that is different is that the kind of polyauthored nature is that one of my jobs as a creative, I see, is to sort of try and understand as much as I can, almost in terms of a technical empathy for what is possible in a theatre project, and try and educate myself to be able to lead a project with people perhaps definitely who know a lot less about the tech, and then bringing in specialists at the right moment. Always almost universally specialists who haven't worked in theatre before, which is an amazing territory to be in as a theatre maker. And I guess the idea of that is that digital tech sort of, in a way, is a new friend for an ancient art form, which is what theatre is, obviously. And so I kind of see my job to do a lot of that groundwork, and then once we're in the room, that polyauthoring just happens. If I facilitated it well. So, but that does take, for the writers out there listening, I guess it's that thing of, you don't have to know about all the digital tech, but if you know about what that digital tech can do, and you find the right collaborator, then that can be, that can be wild. It can be a really wild ride, and I guess as well, for when you're in, I don't know this because I don't go and pitch for commissions like writers, I guess, do. In fact, I'm very naive about how writers do that. It'd be interested to know. But I'm guessing if you pitch for commissions, you're sort of talking about ideas and you're talking about process and approach. But yeah, if you can talk about wanting to explore how AI is going to be fundamentally informed by white men in San Francisco, and what's that going to mean for storytelling, you know, that's interesting. So and that's just a question of doing the things which we all love, which is reading, you know, Wired magazine, stuff like that. So yeah, that's all right? Is that all right to begin with, Aaron? Is that all right?
That is absolutely fine. I think that's a great provocation in terms of having tech as a new friend for an ancient art form. I think that's a fantastic provocation, and you know, I'm sure we can agree. CARIDAD and Eve will agree, and hopefully Tim as well, that for writers it can be daunting. In fact, for many emerging theatre makers, it can be daunting, that prospect of the introduction to tech. I know certainly from my perspective, and I'm sure you'll agree as well, that it is a challenging, you know, place to position. Especially when, you know, if you feel the pressures, and some of our attendees listening may agree, then you feel the pressure to know it all. It can be quite difficult and daunting in tech and theatre and digital and theatre, more so than that. But I always think that now is a great time to move across to Tim and include you in the conversation. So Tim, as our new friend to the cultural conversation here, I'm sure you'll have some interesting points to raise from your experience with Tech East and how we can collaborate outside of the sector. I'm sure you'll have some interesting things to say.
Yeah, I hope so. It's very nice to be in this environment. I mean, I originally was an undergraduate in English literature, and I did work for the early part of my career in book publishing, and I've sort of drifted off over the years into a sort of what I think of as more of a science world than an arts world, but I've sometimes felt like a fish out of water, actually. And what Jack was just saying about the potential value of a collaboration where you bring people from different disciplines together with different mindsets and worldviews and different sort of sets of possibly, you know, different frames of reference can spark all kinds of interesting things. And I think that's the key here, is when we talk about kind of innovation and digital innovation. I mean, nobody knows everything there is to know about digital innovation, that's for sure. But if one is in a position where was someone daunted by what might be possible, there is no substitute for talking to, whether that's you know, digitally or in person, talking to people who might be able to help, whatever it is. So, and we've talked about a lot of different examples of sort of digital technology being applied to theatre and writing and performance. And it very much depends on kind of what it is one's trying to do. I mean, if one is working in an environment that's very, very rich and well supported by digital technologists, programs, and if one already has that support group, then those conversations are probably going to be slightly different from being right at the start of a digital journey, as I think many have found themselves, especially over the last 18 months or so, really experimenting, you know, through necessity. So I think that's the first thing I'd want to perhaps say, is that I think that the level of support that one might be able to find for innovation, if one is prepared to be collaborative locally, is in a specific place, is probably perhaps greater than people realize, simply because, back to where I started, if one is in the world of technology, science, what lives and breathes AI on a day-to-day basis, runs an AI business, or runs a virtual reality business. One is not necessarily spending the day with playwrights and theatre makers, unless one's in a niche. But nevertheless, there's a huge amount of value to be had in those conversations. And I very much welcome being part of this, because I think to some of the things that have been said already, we're talking about, what might be the art of the possible, what might be out there that could be interesting, that could enable a creative process, could enable a new body of work, could enable a new way of delivering that body of work to a new audience in a different way. There will be a lot of people who can help locally, and it's a case of finding those people, and that's why an organisation like Tech East exists, to try and kind of bring together the tech ecosystem regionally, so in the east of England, here we are, but also to make that community and that ecosystem more accessible to industries and individuals and sectors that might not normally engage with it, and all of that, taken together can create some very unpredictable and exciting outcomes. But to keep, sort of keeping things very, very simple. And what is one trying to achieve? In the lead up to this, I was doing a little bit of research, and found two very contrasting examples. Behind, on the one hand, kind of Ars Electronica's kind of incredible kind of creative labs work, very, very kind of interesting and diverse and rich in terms of projects. On the other hand, looking at the Writers Guild's digital delivery of new plays principle, it's very much about the rights, the economics, the practicalities of it. And when one's talking about digital, I guess holding in that spectrum from the nuts and bolts through to the right at the leading edge of what is possible, can be quite daunting. So hopefully today is about exploring quite a lot of that spectrum in an interesting way.
No, I completely agree, and want to open that out really, Tim, to the rest of the panel. That collaboration is vital. I'm sure many of us agree to our practice. And Jack, I'm sure that you, in CARIDAD and Eve as well, I'm sure that you have experience of kind of collaborating outside of that sector and facilitating those collaborations. And for our attendees listening today, I'm sure we'll chat about what are good examples of that, and I'm sure you guys can give those examples, but also how to facilitate that and how that is functionally, if anybody has anything to speak to on that.
Well, I can talk about different ways into collaboration technically. So the first one was a cold email call to Deloitte Digital, and said, this was for Frogman in 2016, and just said, I'd really like to explore how to work with VR. And so there was an invite to go in and have a look at their laboratory. A lot, like, I dread to think how much money is to Deloitte Digital in terms of how that works. And going in as a subsidized theatre maker was quite eye-opening, and it was eye-opening to sort of have all the different types of digital tech in person exposed to us. The second one was like off the back of that project, working with a company in Utrecht in Amsterdam, who did a lot of the just to sort of make it simple, basically a lot of the coding for the AR kind of project, and that was working digitally, remotely. And so that workflow backwards and forwards was really interesting. And then the final one was off the back of a visit when one of our shows was touring in Indonesia with a artist collective who philosophically approach creating work in the same way we do, as in collectively in Makassar and South Sulawesi. And they then basically came on board as people who were going to help collaborate with us as capturing video and sound that was then going to be used in our digital tech, which is a really interesting kind of way of thinking about content of the use of digital, and also access in a slightly different context. The idea of access, that collaboration was capturing field and sound recordings, frankly, with two artists from Makassar going to the oldest figurative cave painting ever found as residents of Makassar, rather than me going over and doing it with them, which created a whole new relationship to content capture. And it was completely amazing and fascinating. And through all three of those, all completely different, it's fundamentally, it's like building a relationship, and the person who says yes is the right person, really. That's the thing, isn't it? We all know that as creative people, the people who say yes are the right people. And from there comes the project. And the number of times I must have emailed lots of digital tech companies or whatever and haven't heard back. And I think it's, as artists, it's hard to be resilient with that. But if, you know, if you don't email or, you know, try to get in touch, you'll never know. And ideally, you'd have a bit of a sense of what you want to do, so it's a clear offer. I'm thinking about the writers watching, but also there are people out there whose job it is to say yes. You know, like all the National Theatre Portfolio companies, it's their job. So if someone emails me and said, how do I deal with VR? Whenever I, you know, most of the time I'd like to think I say yeah. That's why we have a tech library here in Norwich. So all our digital tech that we've bought, for whatever reason we've had to buy it, it's it can be used for free for anyone who's happy to pay the postage for it. And it's amazing how hard it is to get the message out about that, actually. But it's also amazing when people do borrow it. And our number one rule is that it has to be for exploration rather than for use and actual performance. So we're like, you know, take hold of the cameras and just play. You know what I mean? Because it's that detethering of what we all want is to explore, but that detethering from exploration to production for things. So yeah, there's just three different examples, Aaron, of how collaboration has come about for us.
No, I think that's fantastic, Jack. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure even in CARIDAD, if you wish to come back in on that as well as a writer, you know, offering that perspective to a writer's delegate today as well could certainly be interesting.
Yeah, I would say that for writers, it's such a lonely business. You know, you're like you're in front of your laptop or you're scribbling in a notebook, and so it feels a little bit daunting sometimes to venture out and just figure out what the tools are, to be honest. If you're interested in hyperlinked dramaturgy, which is something that I've, you know, always been an advocate for, but also practicing as an artist, then you try to find, in terms of collaborations, you try to find people that have similar interests, for example, you know, and sort of like, who else is interested in this kind of like, and also in hyperlinking, and also hyperlinking as a metaphorical idea, as a philosophical one, but also one that involves the transnational in its most utopian sense. And not in its criminal sense, and also thinking about, through those conversations around borderlessness, around what kind of technologies are available. There are so many, but also which ones are sustainable, hopefully, question mark, and also ones that are that have integrity around them in terms of where they're resourced, and which is a huge question and a problematic one, I think, to consider. Like, where is the tech coming from, and who owns it, and who's being exploited at the bottom of that food chain? And so those are, like, you know, deep conversations to have on a more surface level as an artist, thinking about who else is doing this kind of work. So for writers out there, if you're like, I don't know what to do, I'm stuck in front of my laptop, but I want to talk to people, you know, one of the things you do is, you know, kind of, who else is doing this kind of work? Can I knock on their door? Like, literally, we have the means technologically to do that. I'm here in New York. You guys are in Norwich and London, you know, and Cambridge, respectively. So I feel like, you know, go to your digital spaces that have no geographical boundaries and start just calling people. And there's like you know, start talking to people like in Ireland or at Big Telly or at, you know, or Jared Mizaki in DC or the Creation Theater Company. There's so many people that are doing this kind of work and doing it in radically different ways. And so one thing you can do is just be part of like a hub, right? That's sort of thinking through ideas. And the other thing is figuring out for yourself, because I think that there was a word overwhelmed that was used earlier. It is overwhelming, right? Like you feel like, oh my God, there's so much, and what do I do? And there's also, I think, from a writing standpoint, sometimes the pressure to meet all the demands that are possible, right? So that you feel like, oh, I can do 10,000 things in my piece that I'm making. Let me do them all. It's like, actually, you don't have to. You can actually start winnowing out what is actually organically necessary for the piece that you're making, and actually sometimes doing something that feels very low tech is actually speaking to the big ideas and themes and formal explorations that you're doing in your writing. And so I think that, dream big. My adage is always dream big and dream impossible, and then figure out like what are the most sustainable ways of doing that. If you don't have like the budget of like millions of dollars or whatever, then how can you do it with less and in a way that's not only cost effective but also environmentally effective? And I'd be surprised. I've seen so much incredible work, even over the last 18 months, of just people like that have low resources fiscally that have just been incredibly inventive, and you're like, oh right, you can do that, right? So I think that it's also like seeking out work. There's the high-end work, and it's spectacular and beautiful, and oh my God, how do they do that? And then there's work that's like, oh, they did that with like 5 things, right? And then you can like start figuring out and ask them, what software are you using? What, like, really just ask the creators. And I've found like in this community, by and large, people are very generous and welcoming, and wanting to kind of like share their techie know-how, as it were. And I think the writers, that's also daunting, because like, I don't know what that is. Can I find out? And it's like, you can just ask. Like, people will tell you. So there's that's some advice from my end.
That's so extraordinarily exciting, CARIDAD and Jack. I'd like to throw in my kind of 2 cents with that. I feel like this has been implicit in a lot of what you're saying, but just to make it explicit, like if there was one thing that I wish every writer starting out working in new forms, and especially new digital forms, knew, it's that nobody is expecting you to be a programmer. They're expecting you to be a writer, and that you have an actual specific set of technical skills. We're not used to thinking of writing and dramaturgy necessarily as being a technical skill, but it definitely is. And the point is to put you together with people who have other technical skills, so that you guys can bring out the best in each other, rather than you like needing to become a coder. Although I do think it is interesting. I recently had the experience, earlier this year, I had the experience of coding a game that I made for the first time. And I've worked quite a lot in games, but I hadn't previously been a lead artist ever, and I hadn't had the experience of programming it, and I was quite anxious about it. And I sort of felt like the artistic director of the company that I was working for, which is Coney and Tessa Stevens, he was quite keen that I write it myself, and I was bricking it. Does that count as swearing? Anyway, great. It took me longer than it would have taken somebody else, but I was really grateful. Like, I hadn't quite understood. I was really grateful to have that experience. The other thing that I feel is important in talking about kind of finding new forms of theater, I did an amazing residency, a group residency at the Donmar Warehouse earlier this year called Future Forms, which was led by Sasha Wares, who is obviously one of the great straight theater, is that what we're calling it? Straight theater directors of her generation, but is profoundly interested in virtual reality. And that's kind of a lot of her practice right now. And the residency was very focused on virtual reality as a result. But something that we were talking about, which has really stayed with me and feels so important in terms of writing for new forms, is that like the essence of modernism is the failure of technology. meaning like, I mean, this is like a very kind of a very specific version of history, that it's not the only version of history, but there's a version of art history which says that we're trying to reproduce the visual world as closely as we possibly can. And then the camera is invented, and all of a sudden, like, those skills feel really redundant, but also we discover that the camera is always pointing in one direction, and that there's always stuff that can't make it into the frame, and that therefore a feeling of objective representation kind of can't exist, and that all of modern art kind of that stems from that, like modern visual art, but also modern storytelling, kind of comes from the impossibility of, or kind of comes from that like technical failure. Um, uh, and that a lot of what is exciting about making art in the age of mechanical and digital reproduction uh, is pushing seemingly infinitely powerful technologies to the point that they fail. And I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes art in new technologies can feel sort of unsatisfyingly light, is that we're used to distortion on the record, or auto-tune, kind of, like, making the notes not flow. We're used to technology being pushed to the limit. And when we don't have that, it strikes us as like wrong and unsatisfying and unhuman, even though actually it's I don't know, it's another texture that we can play with. So that has been really rambling, but I have a lot of thoughts and feelings on this subject. So thank you for giving me the space.
Absolutely, I think it's such an important part of the conversation to have. Our placement with tech, and how it can feel light. And I think we spoke a lot. One word that's come up quite a bit has been daunting. And it, for some of our delegation watching this, I'm sure it can be. And of course, obviously through the course of the pandemic as well. Like you're saying, Eve, there, you've had the opportunity to complete the residency, and Tim and Jack, you've spoken of some great initiatives in CARIDAD as well. At this time of learning and reinvention almost, and I think that's a word that's been thrown about in our sector and outside of our sector as well. What do we think, has been, in terms of potentially bad practice? What can we learn, and how can we explore opportunities for new tech frontiers, throughout our evolution post-pandemic? How does that, sit for us theatre makers and Tim as well outside of the sector, and how can we use that knowledge outside, bring it in?
So maybe I can share something about lots of that thing of kind of reaching out and asking questions. A lot of emails that I received in autumn of 2017 after having made this show Frogman, that was an in-person 30 people with VR headsets on, taking them on and off, and a live play happening at the same time, from lots of big theatres, was how do you do that? And it was really interesting to me how it seemed that people felt very intimidated by how to do that. And it was amazing that the kind of social contract of going to a theatre, whatever that may be, right? Like if your space is like, say at one end of it, it's like super hallowed cathedral, and then the other end, it's like any noise or whatever is totally welcome, including, as Eve says, the glitch in the record, i.e. the VR headset not working or whatever. It really amazed me how I'm talking like digital producers here, people whose jobs it is. I would not call myself a digital producer, but it was amazing how in the theatre world there seemed to be a bit of a panic around how to curate that experience. And it made me think a lot about like empathy again, and how to sort of put yourself in the position of people using these things, and actually like the hallowed nature of going to the theatre needed to be rethought, and kind of almost like a new personalization of what you need to go into a theatre to use these, especially wearable technology, which is, you know, like most people, I'm taking like my mum for an example, she picks up the phone and, you know, there can be a panic even with a mobile phone, right? So if you take in certainly in the UK, I don't know about America, but your major demographic of theatre goers in the UK are over 40. And then you flip that on its head in China, and the major demographic of theatre goers are under 40. And so you've got this amazing differential of like curation of experience, of how things work for people. So I can imagine, you know, as writers, how does that work in terms of, you know, the kind of sort of wanting to kind of curate the experience of how people experience your play, and having very little knowledge and understanding, especially if you're using digital tech in a location based, how that works. That's really, you know, that's really intimidating. But yeah, I am rambling, but I think I was just amazed that there was almost this sort of like thinking that because we'd made this play that used tech in this way, that we would somehow know the answers to it. And we were doing that in a festival context as well, which is of course really, really different to maybe a venue that is like regularly producing stuff and has its own like vibe. So we pretty much had to invent how we did it. And I think we got it wrong the first time we did it, because we tried to normalize wearable digital tech by, you know, they were on the chairs, it was all plugged in, you come in, you just put it on. We tried to normalize this alien object that was in the space, right? In the same way that these days, if you see a video projector in the air, you go, oh, it's just a video projector. But there was surely a time where video projectors being used in theatre was like this. I mean, sure, you weren't putting a video projector on your face, but we were trying to normalize it. And actually, I think we did some amazing things, like we superimposed in 4 directions British Sign Language interpretation of the play, which was very interesting in terms of access. But we really let ourselves down where we should have just been stood at the door, being like, hey, there's this weird thing you're going to have to put on your face. It's like when you first picked up a smartphone and it was weird. It's okay. It might glitch, but keep focused on the great story we're telling and you'll have a great time. And that kind of stuff is maybe it's because I'm getting a bit more, maybe it's because I'm a little bit more distanced now from that particular super small loop of theatre making with that sort of tech, that I'm kind of taking a step back and looking in it, that I'm now like, oh, just being super honest about the fact that, as Eve said, it could glitch, it could fail. I'm sorry if that isn't really what you were saying, but like that kind of, that the imperfection.
That's kind of what I was saying.
Yeah, cool. I mean, like the imperfection of this stuff is just as interesting as I don't know, something that happens live that perhaps follows a different path, and trusting that is okay.
Just wanted to add that you know, of course, from a writing standpoint, at least writing for a performance, you're constantly thinking about proximity and distance, and you're thinking about embodiment and disembodiment, which in working in sort of digital realms, those questions become heightened. And then you have to make choices around that. So I would say, like, for the writers out there, you know, if your tools have been thus far, I'm in a physical space, and you know, people come in and things happen, and with other people, and maybe because I've been working a lot with students who spent like the first part of lockdown really not even watching or engaging with digital work because, well, fear and trauma, right? You know, so I think there's also this kind of like baggage that's coming to, you know, in a way that's very normal, to use that word for a second, of everyone, we're going through global trauma right now. So everyone has PTSD, right? So, and I think that for a lot of theater makers, even if they've chosen the digital world, think of themselves as analog or in a kind of analog world, the idea of digital feels threatening or feels alien or feels maybe not sacred, you know, whatever words they're attaching to that. And also feels like it's putting them out, it's disembodied. So it feels a little bit like, how do I fit into this world, right? So I've talked to a lot of students who have just been shunning, kind of even exploring this realm. And then I've been exposing them to work made by collaborators, and they've been like, oh, this can happen. Wait, that can happen. Wait. And so suddenly the idea of possibility starts to be re-energized. And then those central questions around proximity, distance, embodiment, disembodiment, access, who is it for, central questions that are involved in our art making on a daily level, sociopolitically and philosophically, start to kind of reorient themselves. And then exploring then within that, like, what are the ideas around, if we're thinking about disembodiment, how many levels of disembodiment are there? And the fact, of course, that a piece can exist on the phone and on a screen and on multiple screens, also in a physical location. How do you access that physical location? Maybe it's through clicking an app, whatever the sort of thing that you design as an art maker, it's still the function behind it is to have an experience with an audience, and you're curating that experience, again, to use that word, which I know is overused, but you are kind of like guiding an audience through an experience. You're inviting some audiences into something, and you're also giving them, one of the things I love, Eve, you were talking about, like, you don't know when Invisible Summer was happening, and it's like, I don't know what the audience is doing. Where are they? What are they up to? Are they clicking? Are they not clicking? Something that's fascinating around work that exists in a kind of disembodied state, where the agency is thrown back to the audience. So in a sense that you're curating only a part of it, the construction of it and the dissemination of it, and then the audience is like, well, I can see it in my PJs, I can see it tomorrow, I can not click, I can click a little bit, I can come back. Like that level of agency where you have no control over, I think is actually really exciting. Which I know for like a lot of theater makers, it's like, what? No, I have to control every single second and, guide the experience and all. And it's like, well, actually there's something super liberating about, it's intimate, right? It's like, I love that, like some of the work that I did this year, I have no idea where the audience was seeing it and like what they were up to. And maybe they were just like hanging out on their couch and like eating popcorn or whatever they were doing, or maybe they were going to the bathroom, or maybe they were in a park, or like, that there's kind of like a beauty to that, because I think that one of the things that I was reminded of over the pandemic, and which of course is ongoing and will be ongoing because we're experiencing climate change, is that, which I think I'd forgotten, to be honest, is that art and life go together, right? And that there's something kind of exquisite and beautiful about, I'm just hanging around doing my dishes or doing whatever, and then suddenly, oh, some art. Oh, awesome. Let's hang out with some art for a while. Oh, let's go back and do the thing. And like, actually, that's what I love. And what I love less, I think, and maybe this is just me reacting to everything, is like, what I love less now is like the idea of event, the idea that, oh, you have to go to this thing because this thing is important with a capital I, and like it's a thing that's going to matter. And like, you know what? I wanted to feel like it's like I could just walk next door and experience some art. Like that's, I think, the beauty of that. When people during the pandemic, the earliest part of lockdown, were like, I don't know if you guys did this. In my neighborhood, people were like doing little baskets for each other and putting in, there was this poetry project and people were doing like little poems and putting them in baskets and just putting them by people's doors. And I was like, that's exactly the thing. That's interesting. The fact that it feels handmade, even if it's not, like, even if the means of it are not, don't see that artisanship, that the fact that artisan quality is still there, and that in fact that it feels accessible and available and in your hands. That's the part that it's exciting, and I think that I hope we don't lose that. And I thought, because you asked a question about post-pandemic, Aaron, and I think that's really crucial to keep in mind, because I have a feeling that this idea of event with a capital E is going to start dictating a lot of programming or choices around programming, because it feels like, there's anxiety about, will audiences return, quote unquote, and who are they, and what they, and so I think that the idea of events sometimes is a kind of way of capitalizing on that. But actually, I think maybe doing the opposite might bring an audience quote back if they have not been on board already. Just some thoughts.
I think that's fantastic, CARIDAD. I also think that, I've been very strong about through the pandemic that audiences have never went away. They have continued to engage with us, and digital has been the forefront of leading that. And I think now we can engage a completely new demographic through digital as well. And I think that's so powerful. I know that we could continue this conversation for many hours yet, but I am conscious of time and want to begin wrapping us up. And I want to leave our attendees today with some sort of provocations and some questions and some takeaways from your final thoughts. So if you have anything you want to share very quickly with our attendees to continue the conversation for them throughout the rest of our programme, now is the time to share that for us.
Just if you're, particularly if you're in, Norwich or close to Norwich, then yeah, come find us, and we'll do our best to help.
Likewise, if you are curious about the possibilities of technology, along with Jack and many others, please come and talk to techies. Have a look what's available locally. But I think we talked this afternoon about what might be possible in terms of international collaboration. About boundaries are breaking down. This is all very, very positive stuff. I mean, one thing I think I would just leave people with, we've had some great conversation about virtual reality. We've had some, I think Eve talked extremely interestingly about kind of analog experiences, your kind of glitchy vinyl and that the authenticity that feels with that. I think what I would say around VR particularly is that it's such early days for VR. We all have had those experiences of being in the uncanny valley around VR. It's the same with many aspects of artificial intelligence, of robotics. These tools are actually really, really new, and until they get out of the lab, until they get out of the coding environment and into the real world, and one starts to see collaboration and interaction with artists, they will remain in the uncanny valley. Where I believe certainly we will start to see virtual reality move from the kind of, I'm not allowed to swear on this, I don't think, but we'll start moving from the kind of the crap to the interesting and the amazing and the brilliant, is when artists start to get their hands on VR. And that means democratization of the VR tools. It means opening up VR. It means all of those things, and that will only happen through a process of collaboration. So it's very early days, and if one is put off by some of these technologies because they seem a bit rubbish at the moment, never fear, they will get better in the hands of artists and through collaboration.
I mean, think about like silent films and the way that films, like early film, kind of looks to us. Like, I don't know, like the very earliest films are literally like what you're supposed to be watching is like the fact that the image is moving. If you imagine like 50 years later, the level of depth and storytelling and the kind of new narrative syntax that people were able to find simply by making the work again and again. Yeah, it's incredibly exciting. Like, I think it is maybe worth thinking about this period as like the kind of the early days of film, like in the I don't know, this kind of incredible moment where the syntax isn't established yet, and on the one hand that can be quite anxiety inducing, but on the other hand it's another way of saying that I mean, you could always, like, in theory anything is always possible, but like it's just very easy to imagine like truly anything being possible with these like new ways of receiving story and receiving information that we have in front of us now.
Oh, just my last provocation is don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid. You know, I think there's just a lot of fear sometimes around making, and which is natural just to the art process. Yeah, because it's so you're coming from a place of vulnerability and unknown, and so I think that busting through that, and sometimes it's around thinking of them like if you're thinking about me technological tools outside of like the pen or the computer, then it's like, oh, can I think of other technological tools in my life, like a spoon or a fork, or do you know what I mean? Like thinking of it as something that is just around, actually just even on a conceptual level, can allow sort of these new syntaxes to emerge. But I think sometimes it's like that feeling of alienness can stop you as an artist, I think sometimes. So it's like, oh, you know, it's just like I'm picking up a fork from my drawer and I'm like using it to make art. I think if you think that way, then you kind of are moving forward.
Obsessed with that thought.
Totally agree. I think I'm going to echo that, not to be afraid. Provocation, I think the future is in good hands. I think digital will help us, and I think we need to explore it collaboratively inside and outside the sector. Jack has unfortunately had to leave us early. He now has a board meeting, but he sends his best wishes to everybody, I'm sure. And thank you. All that remains to be said, is thank you for joining us in this conversation. It has been hopefully really inspiring for me personally, for us at HighTide, to be able to facilitate this, and hopefully for yourself at home or wherever you're watching this as well. Continue this conversation with us. If you have any responses, don't be afraid to get in touch with us. You can do that using the chat function at the bottom, but also on our social media, and reach out and share your thoughts with us. We'd be really interested to hear them. All that remains to be said for me is thank you very much to Tim, Eve, CARIDAD and Jack for their participation today. It has been inspiring and engaging, and hopefully you'll join us for the remainder of our Inventing the Future conference and live readings, and you can see all of this live on your Hop-In where you're viewing us now, so don't be afraid to check out everything that's going on there. Thank you very much, everybody, and hopefully we continue this conversation with us. Bye.